Hilchos shofar v'sukkah v'lulav perek shmini. The laws of shofar, sukkah, lulav, chapter 8, the final chapter. Today we are continuing to learn about the lulav. We had shofar in the beginning, then sukkah, and yesterday we started the 2 chapters about lulav. Yesterday we learned the basic obligations about what a lulav should look like. And today we're going to learn about what a lulav and etrog should not look like. And we're going to conclude the chapter with a very fascinating couple of halachot about the special simcha that would take place in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, on Sukkot. So here we go. Halacha Aleph. Arba'as minin ha'elu. The 4 types. These 4 types that we've been talking about for the last chapter. Shehin lulav, v'hadas, v'arava, v'esreg. The lulav, the myrtle branch, the willow branch, and the etrog, the citron. Shehaya echad mehen yavesh. If one of them was dry, get on the screen a picture of all of them dry. Lulav, the way we define dry is that it lost all its greenery. It's just brown. The etrog, the same thing. It's got no color. The hadassim are up top. The whole thing has to become dry. And the aravot, the same thing. So if one of them was dry, it's disqualified. Oy gozul, oy gonov, afilu la'achar yesh. Or it was robbed or stolen. The difference between gzela and gneva, according to halacha, is gzela is outright. You go over to a guy and you just steal his stuff. Gneva is in secret, like a thief. Afilu la'achar yesh. Even if it's after despair, you know the owner gave up hope of ever finding his lulav again. Typically in halacha, when the owner despairs, it becomes yours. But over here we don't say that. Or if the lulav or the hadas or the arava or the etrog grew on a asherah tree, that's a tree that was used for idol worship. It was actually served. Even though the Gentiles then canceled the usage. They said, you know what, we're done with this tree. We don't want to serve it anymore. Or if one of the 4 types belonged to the Ir Nidacha, that's the city that was entirely persuaded to serve idols, and the entire city has to be burnt. So if you use a lulav or an etrog from that city, hareza pasul, it is disqualified, unacceptable for the mitzvah.
Is a picture of the Etz Asherah?
There was no specific tree that was used for Asherah. Any tree could have been used. So they could say a palm tree is going to be our Asherah tree, and then it becomes an Asherah tree. Right. If one of the Arbaat Haminin was involved in being used for idol worship, don't use it initially. But if you did take it after the fact, it's okay. If it was just wilting or withering, it didn't entirely dry out. You can see this is an etrog, still some color there. Didn't fully go bad. The arava also, you can see it has the color green. It's just wilting. Kosher, then it's kosher. Now, under pressure, or if it's a dangerous circumstance, lulav hayavesh kosher avaloi sha'ar aminin. The only leniency we can give you is that a dry lulav will be kosher, but not any of the other types. So in other words, if you have everything else good, a etrog, a hadas, arava, and all you have is a dry lulav, and you have no way to get anything else, so you can use the dry lulav, but nothing else can be dry. By the way, what's the reason for that? Because in the Torah it says, pri eitz hadar. It has to be a fruit of a beautiful tree. So if it's not beautiful, then it doesn't fit the qualifications. So that word is said by the etrog. But from there we learn to all the other minim that has to be the same way. Beis. Esrog shel orla, v'shel truma tmeya, v'shel tevel. An etrog that's orla. Orla means it was picked during the first 3 years of a tree's growth. For the first 3 years that a fruit tree is growing, if it belongs to a Jew, it's orla. All the produce cannot be used. So if you picked an etrog during the first 3 years, shel truma tmeya means it's impure truma. I'm going to go back to this slide. We love this slide. When a farmer cuts crop, everything is called tevel, untithed, till he takes 2% and gives it to the Kohen, 10% to the Levi, another 10% to Yerushalayim. Now, the 2% that goes to the Kohen typically was supposed to be kept pure. Truma had to be kept pure. If it became impure, there's a whole set of laws that deals with how to treat impure truma. If it touched a dead body, if it touched a rodent. So in the 7th book of the Rambam, we're going to have a whole set of laws about Trumat
How
Tmeah.
would he know that?
People kept track in those days. Truma v'tahara was like keeping kosher today.
If
How do you know
mice
something's
at
kosher or
night
not?
Travel on the tree.
Well, the mice have to be dead. If they're alive, it's different.
Oh, okay.
So you would see it. But yeah, this stuff was commonplace. Everybody, it's like today, everybody knows how to put on tefillin or make kiddush. In those days, everybody knew how to keep the laws of impurity, even though today is one of the most complex laws. But if you grew up with it, everybody knew about it. So you have to keep track. So Trumat Tmeah would mean, let's say somebody had an etrog tree. He cut his etrog tree, and he gives 2% to the Kohen. So the Kohen has an etrog, but the etrog becomes impure. So now, can you use this etrog for the mitzvah? B'shel tevel, or if it was untied. Let's say I cut my etrog tree, and I didn't take the gifts. And I want to just grab an etrog and use it for Sukkot. Pasul, disqualified. You cannot use it. Shel demai, kosher. But if it's demai means in doubt. The word demai is a combination of two words. Da, mai. What is this? And it refers to produce that used to belong to Amei Haaretz, people who were not fluent in Torah law. And we weren't sure if they took 10% and gave it to the Levi. We knew for sure that they took 2% and gave it to the Kohen. Everybody did that. But the Amei Haaretz, the regular common folk, townspeople, we didn't know, we didn't trust that they always took ma'aser, that they always took 10%. So their produce was considered to be demai, in doubt. So can you take an etrog of demai and use it? The Rambam says it is kosher. Why? Because a person can always, at any time, declare all his property ownerless, become a poor man, and a poor man is allowed to eat demai. Later in the 7th book of the Rambam, we're going to see that demai, when somebody else has produce that's untrustworthy, if you buy it from them, you have to take another round of maaser, another round of 10% before you eat it. But if you're poor, you don't have to. If you're poor, you can eat demai. So since anybody can become poor at any time, so technically if I take this etrog of demai and I use it for Sukkot, I'm good, because I could have been a poor man. Esrog shel truma tahira. What about an esrog that's of pure truma? It's good truma. The Kohen got his 2% and it's kosher. B'shel maaser sheni b'Yerushalayim, or the second 10%. The 10% which we take to Jerusalem and eat or use in a holy state, lo yito. You shouldn't use it for the lulav, shema yachshire l'tuma, because you might make it susceptible to becoming ritually impure. V'im not al kosher, but bottom line, after the fact, if you did take such a lulav, it's kosher because it's pure. Even if it's in a holy status, and we don't want you to make it less holy, but it's okay for use. Gimel, lulav sheniktam reishay pasul. If a lulav's head was chopped off, it's disqualified. Here you can see the head means the top leaf. So what we were looking at over here, this is the actual lulav. This top leaf over here, the middle leaf, if this would get chopped off, doesn't mean the whole head, you understand? Just the top leaf here. If that leaf loses some of its top, it's disqualified. Nisdak, what if it got cracked? See the picture here? Here. The top leaf, according to the Rambam, it means the top leaf splits. That's what cracked means. The top leaf would split. It's pretty hard for it to happen naturally, but if some people shake the lulav very strongly, or if you're in your sukkah and you don't pay attention, and when you go upwards, you bang it into the roof, so that's a way that you can split the top leaf eventually. So the Rambam says, what's the laws of a cracked lulav? Im nisracha kushnei sdakav zeh mizeh, ad sheyirau kishnayim, if the two leaves become so far from one another that they seem like they're two separate leaves, pasul, then it is disqualified. Haya akum lefanav. Okay, I'm not sure how clearly you can see the pictures here, but let's say the lulav was crooked. This is a nice and straight lulav. Lulav was bent. Now, he describes first bent on the front. Shaharei shidroi kigav bal chatoy teres, where the spine becomes like the back of a hunchback. So lefanav means it's bent frontwards, meaning out towards the front. So this way. Yeah. Understand? The spine becomes like a hunchback. Pasul. That's disqualified. Haya akam la'achayra, but if it was twisted the other way, in other words, inwards, the Rambam calls that backwards, kosher shazuhi briyase. That's kosher because that's the way a lulav naturally grows. I mean, naturally grows straight, but it could also naturally grow this way. For the spine to be bent out of shape, that's unnatural. Unnatural stuff we don't use for the lulav. But if it's bent inwards, that's okay. Nekam la'achad mitzdadav. Here you can see an example. lulav is bent towards its side. So till now we talked about going this way, going that way. What about this way? Maybe I can kind of bend the lulav like this, you see?
Yeah.
That would be bent to the side. So, puzzle. That's also disqualified. It's an unnatural way of growing. Nifredu olav zeme al zeh, v'loy nidaldalu ka'ale hachariyas. What if the leaves split? Here you can see a loose lulav essentially. You see here the lulav is tied, it's kind of naturally tied tightly. If you leave this to grow or just to wilt a little bit, the leaves will separate. They won't fully separate like a palm branch. Do I have a picture of a palm branch? Yeah, here. This is mamish, the leaves literally split out. That's what a lulav will grow into. But at this stage, where they're just loosely split, they aren't hanging out, ka'alei hachariyas, like the leaves of fully grown palm branches, kosher, at that point it's still kosher. Nifritzu olav, if the leaves totally split open, which means, v'hu, sheyidaldalu mishidrei shel lulav, ka'alei hachariyas, they will drape off the spine of the lulav, like leaves of a regular palm branch. This one is, as we showed you before, puzzle, that's disqualified, because now it's not a lulav. Lulav has to be kapois tmarim, it has to be tied up. This is not tied up. Dalit. The Rambam tells you should know. Brias olin shal lulav kachi. The way that a lulav leaf is created, it goes like this. People actually, it's hard to see unless you get up close to it, but every leaf of the lulav is a double leaf. Look, I'll take one off right now just for display purposes. This is one leaf of a lulav, but if you actually open it in the back, it's actually two. They're attached in the front, but they're actually two leaves. When they grow as two, stuck at the back. The back, according to the Rambam, is a revolutionary pshat in the Gemara. There's a lot of argument about this piece of Talmud. The Rambam interprets it in this specific way. The back of every leaf is called tiyomet. Tiyomet would mean like twin. Okay, so because it's the point at which it splits into two. So the Rambam says, Nech hatiyomes pasul. If the tiyomet, if the back of the leaf splits, it's unacceptable. Now, which leaf are we talking about? For example, in the Talmud, there are many opinions that hold, this is talking about the middle leaf, because the middle leaf is the most important one. But the Rambam seems to imply that any leaf, every single leaf has a tiyomet. So the commentaries explain that Rambam is referring to over here if the majority of the leaves split open. The majority of every leaf, the back, splits, that's disqualified. Hayu olav achas mitchilas b'riyosai v'lo hayu lahem tiyomes. What if the lulav grew strangely? It didn't have the double leaf phenomenon. Every leaf was a single leaf. Puzzle. And the whole lulav is disqualified because it's not naturally growing. It doesn't have the natural double leaf. What about another thing? You have this over here. This in the Talmud is called Sinei Har HaBarzel. You can see over here that every lulav leaf is growing one on top of the other. They're overlaying. Right? As I peel away the leaves, you get more and more leaves. What if the lulav, your particular lulav, grew in this way, where each leaf, each leaf was under the next one, instead of overlaying the next one? So the Rambam says, if the top of one leaf reaches the root of the next leaf, that's on the top part of the picture. That's the example where the top of the one leaf reaches the root of the next leaf. To the point that the entire spine, the main leaf of the lulav, is covered by leaves, kosher, that's still kosher. But in the bottom part of the picture, you see, the top of that leaf isn't even reaching the root of the next leaf. So then, pasul, then it's disqualified. Because not a lulav, you have to have all the leaves covering the spine. Okay, that's as far as the lulav goes. Now let's talk about the next one, the hadas, the myrtle branch. It says the Rambam halacha, hey, hadas sheniktam reishay kosher. Fascinating. The hadas, if the top was cut off, unlike the lulav, where it's disqualified, by the hadas it's still kosher. Okay. It's an argument. The Ravid, primary commentator on the Rambam, he says, not okay. Not okay. Shulchan Aruch, because
Not perfect.
no, but yeah, because the Mishnah says it's actually not okay. But there's Rabbi Tarfon argues and says that it is okay. The Rambam follows Rabbi Tarfon, but the Ravid follows the Mishnah. And so in Shulchan Aruch we have the same argument. Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo says it's good, like the Rambam. Ramah, the Ashkenazim say no good, or at least if possible you should not use it. Noshru Raiv Olav. What if most of the leaves of the hadas fell off? I wonder if we have it here. Oh, yeah, leaves fell off the hadas. Im nishtayru shloisha alin bekan echad. If there's at least 3 leaves on one stem, kosher, it's still kosher. In other words, here you have no 3 leaves on any stem, right? But over there you do. You can see in the middle, you have 3 leaves coming out of one stem. So you're still good, according to the Rambam. Hayu anavav merubais me olav. What if the berries were more than the leaves? Some myrtle branches have berries growing on them. You can see here, between the leaves, there's berries. So the Rambam says, im yeruka is kosher. If the berries are green, as in this picture, green berries, kosher, because it's the same type. It looks the same as the myrtle. But in this picture here, you can see on the top, there's red berries. And on the bottom, there's black berries. If they're red or black, puzzle, then it's disqualified. Doesn't look like the myrtle branch.
By the way, are these edible?
Huh?
Are these edible?
Some of them are, some of them aren't. Depends what type you have. The im miaton kosher. If you took some of them off, as in the picture, it's okay, because now you don't have so many berries. But you cannot take them off on the holiday itself, because that's like fixing up the myrtle, which is not okay. If you transgressed and you picked them on holiday, or you picked them one by one to eat them, right? Some of them were edible, kosher, then it's kosher. In other words, you shouldn't do it on the holiday, but if you did, you still fixed it, so it's still a kosher myrtle branch. Vav, arava sheniktam reisha, kshera. An arava, I don't have a picture here, but if the willow branch, okay, this is our willow branch, this one, okay, if the top was cut off, kosher. Again, the Rambam rules like Rabbi Tarfon. The other commentators argue, and today that's what we try to do. If you have an arava that's cut off, better not to use it. Nifritzu aleha, if all the leaves fell off, psula, it is disqualified. Zayin, esrog, shenikav, if an esrog got a hole, 2 types of holes we're going to see. First, nekev mefulash. Nekev mefulash means a hole that goes all the way through. So you put a needle through the esrog. Puzzle. Kolshu, even if it's the tiniest amount, puzzle, it's disqualified. Because the hole goes all the way through, you're done. What if it's a hole that's not all the way through? As in this picture, you stuck a nail into an etrog, but it didn't go all the way through. So now it depends how big it is. Im hayaki isar or yeser puzzle. If the hole was as big as an isar coin, small coin, or more, then it's disqualified. But if it's not that big, then it's okay. Chaser kol shehu puzzle.
Is coin?
Type of coin.
Type of coin?
Yeah.
Or is it was coin that they used to...
In the Talmudic time, they used to measure it. Chaser kol shehu puzzle. If the tiniest amount is missing from the etrog, then it's disqualified. In other words, when we talk about the hole not being big enough for a coin, it means when the hole doesn't make the etrog miss anything. It's like you pushed it in, let's say, you made a hole, but everything is still there. But once you're missing part of the etrog, it's all disqualified. Nital dadoy. If the dad is like the edge of it, the top of it, the protrusion was taken off, the entire small head, where the shoshana, like a flower, what we call today the pitom, is on it, as you can see over here. So the entire head, you can see it over here also. Yeah. The brown part is the pitom, but then under there's also a little part of the head. So the Rambam says the whole thing has to be taken off. Dado is the whole head, puzzle, then it's disqualified. Nital ha'etz shehu toli by ba'ilan me'ikara esrog. If the part of the wood on which the etrog hangs from the tree, this side, was taken off from the root of the etrog, v'nishar mekayma guma, to the point that all that's left is an actual hole. So now that part of it was chopped off. The whole thing came out. All you have is an indent. Puzzle is disqualified. Also chazazis alav. If blisters began to grow on the etrog, bumps, whatever. Im b'shnayim u'shleisha mekaymes. If it's 2-3 places, puzzle. The whole etrog is disqualified. It's no longer beautiful. But if all the blisters or unhealthy growths are all gathered in one place, im also al rubai, if it covers most of the esrog, pasul, then the esrog is disqualified. But if not, let's say like over here, just one spot, that would be okay esrog. Only if it goes everywhere, then it's a problem. However, the im al dadoy, but once the blister would be on the top of the etrog, by the dad, the head where the pitom is, even the tiniest blister, afilu kol shehu pasul, even the smallest amount, would make it disqualified, according to the Rambam. Niklaf hakrum hachitzayna shalai. If the outer membrane, the outer layer of the etrog was peeled off, she'ene mechasre, where it's not lacking any part of the etrog, it will stay green. If you peel the etrog or yellowish, you can peel off the total first outer layer and it will still retain its color as it isn't when it's created. Im niklaf kula, if the entirety of the etrog was peeled off, pasul, it's disqualified. V'im nishar mimenu kol shehu kosher, but if even the slightest amount of peel of the outer layer was left, then it's kosher. Ches. Today it's so uncommon because we're blessed with an abundance of proper etrogim, but the Rambam had to address all the types of etrogim that you might find. Esrog shehu tafuach, an etrog which is inflated. Saruach, or it's decaying. Okay, that's an inflated etrog on the right. That's a decaying etrog on the left. Kavush, if an etrog was pickled. Shaluk, or it was cooked. Shachar lavan, black or white. That's black on the right side. White, it's more pale, not so much white. It's a pale etrog. Minumar, if it's spotted. There's an argument what spotted means. Some say spotted means it's simply spotted with like different types of colors, and some say spotted means it actually has unnatural colors. Yaroi kikarti, or it's green as a leek. Okay, here you see a leek. A leek is like white, green, and then very green at the top. So it's a reference to the very top, where it's the darkest green. Pasul, all of these are disqualified, unacceptable etrogim. Gidle bitfus, interesting thing here. If you grew an etrog in a mold, see on the right side? Guy puts a bottle around the etrog as it's growing, and now, as it's going to expand, it's going to adopt the shape of that jar. So the etrog will look unnatural. And you formed it like another type of creation. Pasul, disqualified, because it has to look like a etrog. Asohu kimin briyasa. But if you kept the shape of the etrog, afal pisha asohu dapin, even if you made it columns. The commentaries explain, you made it go in and out, up and down, like in the left picture here. So those are unnatural bumps, but the shape is retained, then it's kosher, Hatiyoim, a twin etrog, there's a twin etrog right there. They grow, it's like Siamese twin etrogs. The haboiser and unripe etrogim, immature, kosher, those are kosher. Mokim shaha esregim shalahem kein shacharis mu'uta ksherin. If it's a place where all their etrogs have a little blackness, it's kosher. But if they were so black, like a total Negro, then they are disqualified wherever it is. In other words, very, very dark black, no good. Test. All of these lulavs and etrogs that we said that they're all disqualified because of the defects that we explained, or because they were robbed or stolen, all of these issues are only on the first day of the holiday. But on the second day of holiday, or the rest of the holiday, ha-koil kosher. Everything is kosher. Except, if it's a disqualification on account of idol worship, or because the etrog is forbidden to be eaten, it's tevel, it's untithed produce, etc., that's disqualified on any day. First day, other days. But if it's a problem of the shape or the type or the beauty, then it's all okay after the first day. Yud, ein adam yaitze b'yom tov rishon shel chag bilulavay shel chaverei sheishalenu mimenu. A person cannot fulfill his obligation on the first day of holiday with somebody else's lulav, even if you borrow it from him. Ad sheyitanu lei b'matana. He must give it to you as a gift, because you have to own it. Nasne lo al manas lahachazirei. If the person gives it to you with the express condition that you're going to give it back, no problem. Do your obligation and return it. Because a gift on condition to be returned is a gift. But if you don't give it back, then you haven't fulfilled the obligation retroactively. Because it turns out you had a stolen lulav. On the first day of Sukkot, you cannot give your lulav to a child. Because the child can only acquire. He can't pass it back to you, biblically. Which means that if he'll give it, even if he gives it back to you, it's not really giving back. Both the lulav, any of the other four types we're talking about, if one of them was borrowed, you cannot use it to fulfill your obligation on the first day of the holiday. Partners bought a lulav or an etrog in partnership. Neither one can fulfill his obligation on the first day until the other guy gives away his portion as a gift, and then you give your portion as a gift to your partner. If brothers bought an etrog from an undivided estate, tfisas habayis is an expression when a father passes away and leaves an inheritance to his children, before the sons have a chance to divide up everything that their father owned individually, everything is still in one big pot. That's called tfisat habayit. So let's say the father passed away 2 days before Sukkot. They didn't have a chance to divide the estate yet. But they have to have a lulav. They have to have an etrog. So the brothers got together, took from the pot, and they bought an etrog. And one of them takes that etrog and uses it for his mitzvah. So we have to check. If had the brother eaten the etrog, none of the other brothers would care. Yatsa, then he fulfills obligation because it's his etrog. But if they were particular and they would have cared, had he eaten the etrog for breakfast, lo yatsa, then he cannot fulfill his obligation with using the etrog until they pass on their portion as a gift, because otherwise it's not his etrog. But what if the two brothers, one bought an etrog and one bought a quince? It's a wild apple. Or they bought an etrog, a pomegranate, and a quince together from the undivided estate. In this case, there's no way he can use the etrog unless the other brother gives him his portion as a gift. Even if it was a case where had he eaten it, they wouldn't care. But because one bought the etrog and one bought the quince, it shows that they're all going from the undivided estate. And so they have to each pass on their portion before the other one can use the etrog. And now from here on, to the end of the chapter, the Rambam will describe the special simcha, the special joy that took place in the Holy Temple. And many, many questions have been raised on the next few halachot in the Rambam. The Rebbe has a revolutionary talk that he delivered on one of the holidays of Sukkot, explaining all of the coming halachot, and that's how we're going to learn the next few pieces of Rambam. Says the Rambam, halacha yud beis, afal pisha kol hamayados mitzvah lismayach behen. Even though every holiday there's a mitzvah to be happy, it says v'samachta b'chagecha, b'chag ha-Sukkos, on the holiday of Sukkot, haisa b'mikdash yoim simcha yesera, or some texts don't have the word yoim. Haisa b'mikdash simcha yesera. On Sukkot, in the Holy Temple, they had extra joy. Shenemar, as it says, usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem, shivas yamin. You have to rejoice in front of Hashem your God for 7 days. Now, this, as the Rebbe explains it, the Rambam is not telling you that this verse is a source for a new mitzvah, to be happy, extra happy on Sukkot. Because this verse is actually the source for using the Lulav in the Holy Temple 7 days. It's got nothing to do with Simcha. It's a mitzvah of Lulav, or a mitzvah of bringing a special korban, a special sacrifice. What the Rambam is saying is that since the Torah says the word usmachtem again by Sukkot, so the people who were living in the times of the temple said to themselves, if we anyways have a mitzvah to be happy on a holiday, and the Torah says usmachtem again by Sukkot, that means that we should act happier. In other words, it was a human initiation. The Jews came and said, examining the Torah, we should be extra happy. The Rambam doesn't say it's a mitzvah to be extra happy. Hoisa, there used to be an extra happiness. What did they used to do to express this extra happiness? Erev Yom Tov Harishain, just before the holiday set in, before the first day of Yom Tov, Hayu Misaknin Bamikdash Mokim Lanashim Milamayla. They would fix a balcony in the Holy Temple, a place for the women to stand up top, v'la'anashim milamata, and a place for the men to dance down below. In the Holy Temple, this is in the Ezrat Nashim, in the women's courtyard in the front. That's why it was called the women's courtyard, because the women used to gaze from top to watch this extra simcha. Kadesh lo yisarvu elu im elu, they made this mechitza, this is the first mechitza. So men and women shouldn't mix. And the Jews, of their own accord, would be extra happy. Even though they would set up the whole stage before the first day of holiday, but they would begin to actually celebrate after the first day of holiday was over, because that's when you can use instruments and all kinds of things that they would use. Same thing on every day of Chol HaMoed. From after the offering of the afternoon daily sacrifice, they would begin to rejoice, to rejoice all the rest of the day with the night, the whole night. What did this joy look like? The nightlife, the Holy Temple. The flute was playing. And they would play the harp and the lyre and the cymbals. Every person would use the instrument that he knew how to play. And whoever knew how to do with his mouth would do with his mouth. The Rambam holds that it was an individualistic simcha, because the whole simcha isn't a mitzvah. It's a Jew's natural desire to rejoice in Hashem's mitzvah. So whatever the Jew's desire was, that's how it expressed itself. This guy knew how to play guitar, he played guitar. Piano. He knew how to sing, he sang. And they would dance, and they would clap, and they would bang, and they would jump, around. Every person as he knew. And they would say words of song and words of praise. But this simcha would not override Shabbat or holiday. Though you couldn't play any instruments, of course, you wouldn't do this. But on Chol HaMoed, that's when they would do it. Mitzvah laharbais b'simcha zu, and the mitzvah is to increase in this simcha. You see, the Rambam doesn't say the mitzvah is to have the simcha. The mitzvah is to increase the simcha, because once you're aroused with this extra joy that you want to have for Sukkot, now go and take it even further. But now the Rambam says a fascinating thing. Because it came from the inner joy of a mitzvah, the fact was, not every common person, anybody that wanted, can take part in this show. Special people. And the Rambam chooses 6 categories of special people. The greatest of the Jewish sages, the heads of the yeshiva, the Sanhedrin, members of the high court, the Hasidim, the Hazakenim, the pious ones, the elder ones, the Anshe Maisa, and men of deed. Heim shahayu merakdin or mesapkin or menagnin or mesamchin b'mikdash b'mei Chag HaSukkos. They were the ones who would dance and clap and sing and make others happy in the temple on the days of Sukkot. Avol kol ha'am ha'anashim v'hanashim. The rest of the people, the men and the women, kulan bayin liras v'lishmaya. Everybody would come to see and to hear, but they wouldn't necessarily express their joy in action. Only the higher level people, because they were the ones who presumably felt this extra joy of the mitzvah the most. And the Rebbe has a whole beautiful explanation how the Rambam knew all of these people came to the Simchat B'Tah Shoeva, because the Talmud mentions only certain rabbis by name. Now, every rabbi came for sure to this joy. But since the Talmud only mentions certain rabbis by name, so we learn from their names which categories of Jews participated. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania is mentioned. He was the guy he was the great debater. He would debate with the sages of Greece. So from there we know that the Chachmei Yisrael, the wise men, would come. Or it says Hillel Hazaken, Hillel the elder. He calls him the elder because the Zkenim used to come. A whole beautiful sikha where the Rebbe explains how each point the Rambam drew from the Talmud. And now the Rambam says, from here we can derive a general principle. Halacha Tesvav. Hasimcha sheyismach ha'odam ba'asiyas ha'mitzvah. Uve'ahavas ha'kel shetziva behen. The joy that a person rejoices when he does a mitzvah, and when he loves God, who commanded the mitzvah, avodah gedeilahi. It's a great service. In other words, the Rambam is now jumping from Simcha of Sukkot to the general Simcha of the mitzvah. Why? First of all, because they both share the same quality. They both are something in addition to the mitzvah. There is no mitzvah to be joyful on Sukkot, according to the Rambam. The mitzvah, it has to come from you, the Simcha. There's a basic mitzvah, v'samachta b'chagecha, but the extra Simcha has to come from the person. Same thing with every mitzvah. When a person does a mitzvah, is there a mitzvah to be happy also? Not necessarily. You have to find within yourself how while you're going to put on tefillin, you're also going to be happy. That's the great service. And by the way, the Rebbe says, it's even harder by any other mitzvah. On Sukkot, people were happy anyways because it's a holiday. So to be extra happy is a little easier. But a regular mitzvah may not by default have happiness, and you're creating the happiness. That's a very great service of Hashem. Therefore, anybody who holds himself back from this rejoicing, he's deserving to get paid back. Shenemar, as it says, one of the saddest portions in the Torah, the Tochacha, the rebuke, it says, what is the reason why you're getting all these curses? Tachat, because because you didn't serve Hashem your God with joy and gladness of heart. In other words, a part of serving Hashem is serving Hashem with joy, and if you don't, you're deserving of negative things. And somebody who holds highly of himself and gives himself honor and honors himself in these types of places, it's beneath my dignity. I shouldn't dance by hakafot, or something like that. I shouldn't dance or be happy with a mitzvah because I'm too important. The Rambam says he's a sinner and a fool. And on this, Shlomo HaMelech warned and he said, Al tishadar lifnei melech. Do not honor yourself when you're in front of the king. When you're doing a mitzvah, you're in front of the king. You're more important than Hashem. You could afford to be happy, and you should be happy, and you have to be happy. The opposite. Somebody who lowers himself and treats his body lightly in these places. In other words, he goes out of his way to be joyful. Hu hagadol hamechubad ha'ovid me'ava. He is the great one. He is the honored one. He is the one who serves Hashem out of love. V'chein David Melech Yisrael Amar. And so too David HaMelech himself said, Unekaloisi oid mizois v'ha'yisi shafal be'einav. I will hold myself even more lightly in my own eyes. And I'm going to be humble in my own eyes. The greatest greatness, the greatest honor is to be happy in front of Hashem. Shenemar, as it says, King David was dancing wildly and jumping before Hashem. This is when the Aron HaKodesh came back was being brought back to the temple, to the Mishkan at the time. David HaMelech himself danced in front of the Aron HaKodesh. He was the king. And yet, he danced. He showed joy. Why? Because in front of Hashem, that's what you're supposed to do. That's the avodah. And this is how a general lesson that we can derive for having joy in all mitzvahs that we do. Brich Rachamana Desayan. Blessed is the merciful one who gives us assistance. Mazal Tov for finishing Hilchos, Shofar, Sukkot, Lulav, the laws of Shofar, Sukkah, and Lulav.